Hi folks, today we're going to make lasagna. Lots of variations that you can do on lasagna, but the basic things you need are some mince. It doesn't matter what meat you use. You need onion in there, you need some herbs and tomatoes, tomato puree, and then your flat sheet pasta. You can always make this with other sorts of pasta and make it into a pasta bake, but lasagna is the name of the product we're going to make and the shape of this pasta. Put your mince into your pan and break it up slightly. Sometimes mince gets really clogged together and you want to break the meat up. Put it onto the heat on a very, very low heat. What we're trying to do is not add any more fat into this. Try and make it a little bit more healthy, and we're going to cook it very, very gently. Now, next thing we need is our onions, and we need to cut these fairly small. The best way to do this is claw grip, take off the top, take off the root, and then cut through. Notice I'm taking all the rubbish off my board, so I am not mixing up what's rubbish with the ingredients I'm going to use. So once you've cut it in half, it's easier to peel. Get rid of the outside dried layers. You can use shallots if you like instead of onion. And we're going to cut these really quite thin, so about ½ centimetre from the end. You're going to make very small cuts right through to the base, but leaving the little bit at the front. So it's sort of like a fan effect. When it gets so far you can't claw grip it, bridge it and cut under the bridge. So between your finger and your thumb, turn it to a right angle and cut down. Make sure your fingers are straight pointing down so that you're not going to trim your fingernails into it. Once your onion's all cut up, get it into the pan and stir it in with the mince. If you want to use more onion, that's fine. You can use other vegetables as well. So you could put some grated carrot or chopped carrot in here. You can put celery into it. You can also add peppers to your lasagna. You can add any veg you've got, as long as it's not got too much water in. So what I'm doing is I'm going to cut this into very small pieces again, just like the onion. So nice and small. Whatever you put in, cut it nice and fine. That way it'll all cook together and you won't get great chunks of meat or vegetable in there. It all adds to the taste of each mouthful. So once you've chopped your extra vegetables up or grated them, if people don't like vegetables in your household, but we want to obviously eat more vegetables, you can grate them into the lasagna ragu mixture and nobody will notice, but they get the benefits and the taste. Moving the meat around, we don't want it to stick on the bottom, we want it to cook through, and we want it to be broken up. So the vegetables in it help to do that. The other vegetable I'm going to put into this is some mushrooms. I'm going to cut these fairly small, so slice them, leave the skins on, they're fine. Unless they are really old, and then you'll need to take the skins off because they'll be tough. So again, chopping them really fine into small pieces, and they will disappear, but they will give the ragu a taste and they will also give it a texture. I'm going to add the mushrooms in last because the mushrooms don't take a lot of cooking and they produce a lot of water. So I'm going to add those in, stir it round. You can see from the bottom, the meat that's at the bottom has now started to cook really quite quickly. So we want to get this mixed. So we're mixing all the flavours all together so that the meat will take on the flavour of the vegetables. At this point then, I'm going to add in a stock cube. Now stock cubes are really a lot of salt, so I'm not going to put any more salt into this dish. So stock cube for flavour. This is a vegetarian one, which I do prefer to use, but you could use a beef one if you wished, or whatever flavour you like. At this point also, you can put in any other flavours you want. If you like your food really spicy, you could probably put some chilies in here. You could even put some curry powder in, just to make it different for you or whoever's going to be eating your lasagna when it's finished. So once that's crumbled in, I'm going to stir that in, just so it's well mixed. I'm also going to put my garlic in at this point now. So chopped garlic can either go in with your onions or can go in at this point. You can see now the meat's starting to break up, which is what we want. We don't want great chunks of it. And the veggies mixed in. I'm also going to put a teaspoon of dried herbs in now so that they can soak up all the juice that's coming out of everything and rehydrate. Again, well mixed in, and it's starting to smell nice and herby now. Breaking that meat up, you can see now it's just about cooked. There's no red mince really left. We are going to carry on cooking this. Now, you can put wine into this if you wish. If you don't have wine, you don't have to put it in. Traditionally, the Italians put it in. But you just want a slug of wine in there. Just gives another depth of flavour. Once the meat is all cooked, you can see it's not red anymore. We're going to leave it to simmer on a low heat. Now, for that, we need plenty of moisture. So this is when we pop in our tin of chopped tomatoes or plum tomatoes. Don't have to be expensive ones. Don't need any other flavouring in there. Don't have to buy really expensive tomatoes. If you like it really tomatoey, then instead of having another tin of tomatoes, you can pop in some tomato puree. You could always use tomato passata if you've got some. So a couple of tablespoons of tomato puree into it. And you'll be able to see when I stir that through that the colour drastically changes. So we've got a really red coloured sauce. Looks very tomatoey now. So now what I'm going to do is leave that to simmer. If it does tend to dry out a bit, just put a drop of water into it. A couple of tablespoons to keep it quite sloppy. I'm also going to put some pepper in at this stage. No more salt though. And the only other thing I'm going to put in is a teaspoon of sugar. And I'm putting sugar in to combat the acidity of the tomatoes. So whenever you use tomatoes, always put a little bit of sugar in. Just balances it out. So while the ragu is simmering away, and it wants about half an hour to really cook those flavours together, to simmer those together and soften the meat. In another pan, I've got flour and margarine, and I'm going to make a bechamel sauce, which is a white sauce. So just melt the margarine, add the flour, and it makes into a roux, which is just a mixture of margarine and flour. And then gradually add your milk, a little bit at a time. We do it a little bit at a time, we won't get any lumps in the sauce. Well, that's the idea anyway. So you can see as soon as you add it, it starts to thicken, and the flour will absorb the milk and start to expand. Right, so if your sauce gets any lumps in it and you can't get rid of them as you're thickening it, you can use a whisk. So take a whisk and beat so you're breaking up any lumps that are in there. What you need to do once you've added all your milk and you've got rid of any bubbles is carry on stirring it, because the flour will sink down to the bottom. So what we need to do now is boil this sauce to make sure that all the flour is cooked in it. Otherwise the sauce will taste of raw flour, which isn't very pleasant. So make sure you're stirring it all the time so none of the flour can stick onto the bottom and therefore form lumps. And make sure this boils. Sauce is boiled, it'll be thicker, and then you need to leave it to one side. If you want to just use white sauce, that's fine. I'm going to flavour mine and put some cheese into mine, so I'm just going to take it off the heat, because you don't add cheese into the sauce once you're cooking it, otherwise the cheese will split. So the other things that I put into my cheese sauce are a little bit of mustard and some nutmeg. I would put those into white sauce, as well as cheese sauce, just to give it some flavour. Not particularly for the heat, but it just gives it a little bit of flavour. Mustard and some freshly ground nutmeg. So finally grate some nutmeg in. If you haven't got whole nutmeg, use some ground, but it is always better to buy nutmeg in the whole like that. It stays fresh for a lot longer. Right, once your sauce has cooked down, make sure it's not stuck onto the bottom. It will cook so that all the ingredients fall apart. Now some people put lasagna sheets on the bottom. I prefer not to because it tends to stick to the bottom of the bowl of the dish. So about just over half of your mixture onto the bottom of your serving dish. Couple of pieces of lasagna on top, and then I'm going to put a little bit of sauce on top of those, but only a little bit, just to give it some moisture and another layer of flavour, because I'm going to put most of the sauce on the top. So a bit of the sauce on there, another couple of pieces of lasagna Katie cornered so that we're covering up most of the sauce. Then the rest of the sauce goes on the top. Now this sauce can be used for other things. You could use it as a base, mix it with some cooked pasta and do a pasta bake. You can mix it, you can put it into pie, you could put it into a shepherd's pie and put mashed potato on the top if you prefer. So all the sauce into the container. Make sure you get it all out, and then a final layer of lasagna on the top, leaving some space so your sauce can go over, your final sauce can go over the top. So white or bechamel sauce then over the top. The rest of the sauce, this is quite thick, so you could let this sauce down with a bit of cream or some milk if you wanted to, but it'll be fine. This on the top, spread it out from the middle. It'll give it a nice crust, but make sure you get all the sauce out of your pan, not to waste any of it. And then onto the top of it, I'm going to sprinkle some grated cheese. So once you've spread it to the edges, don't worry about the tomato coming through because it's going into the oven, so that will bake. Grated cheese onto the top. Then it goes into the oven for at least half an hour till the lasagna sheets have cooked and it's all amalgamated together.